Let me just share a little bit of what I presented a couple weeks ago at the conference. I didn't get a chance to participate in person, but I presented it online. The conference was about tourist behavior and experimental design. So I thought some of the information may be relevant to the attendees here. I can do a brief recap of what I presented. Based on what we have seen in the past few years, experimental design seems to be a very popular research method nowadays. But there are some criticisms of experimental design studies, and you may find the criticisms apply to other topic area, for example, tourist behavior, and some of the more on the micro level research agenda. Some researchers mentioned that for experimental design study, usually the designs are too practical. The study, the focus or the objectives are too practical. In other words, you don't have really a lot of theoretical underpinning to help design the study or to help design the overall research plan. On the other extreme, we've also seen criticism about experimental design studies, indicating that actually experimental design studies are too abstract, that don't have much practical relevance. In other words, very often we see experimental design studies using scenarios, and the scenarios are not very down to earth or practical. For example, you will ask the participants to imagine something, but if they have no relevant experience or have no idea or interest or paid any attention to a particular phenomenon that you want to study, it is difficult for them to imagine. So the two extreme of the criticisms of experimental design studies are on the one hand too practical, on the other hand lacking practical relevance. But then a common criticism of experimental design studies is about the studies that we design very often reduce very complex phenomena to a construct-to-construct relations. In other words, in experimental design, we very often select a few variables, sometimes two, sometimes three. When you have four variables in an experimental design, it gets really complicated. Because very often in experimental design, you can only manipulate one variable at a time. And when you have two variables manipulated at the same time, then you're looking at a two by two experimental design. So very often we're reducing a very complex phenomenon to construct relations. Tourism phenomena often involves many variables happening at the same time, changing at the same time. So it is difficult to do a very good, rigid, practical, and real experimental design studies in tourism. And sometimes when we look at the manuscripts, the authors pay a lot of attention to technical sophistication. In other words, a lot of details about the experimental design, the scenarios, how they collected data, the measurement, and so forth, without looking at the overall big pictures. The overall big picture being the context of the study, the theoretical underpinning of the study, the real life problem that the study is trying to solve, or providing any actual practical implications. So overly focusing on technical sophistication has very often seen as one of the criticisms of experimental design studies. Some of the other terms that we have seen by reviewers when they look at experimental design studies are, for example, they use the term, the study is trivial, superficial, lack intellectual merit, or look at micro level issues. So all of these are terms that we often see the reviewers comment about experimental design studies. So I thought maybe I share a bit of what I presented at a conference lately with the attendees of today, since you don't have any particular question to start off the evening. So if you have any question or any comments or any observations about experimental design or anything else, you're welcome to jump in.
Professor Xu, may I raise a question?
Hi, Dr. Fu, of course.
Yeah, I recently read a PhD thesis, and the PhD student, and she claimed that she has a lot of innovation or contribution from methodological and empirical perspective. And she used quite a lot of new methods, new tools to do her research. But I realized that she didn't mention any about the theoretical contribution. So I raised this question. I said that as a PhD thesis, that it's not only about methodological innovation and empirical innovation. You need to reflect the thesis. But this student, and she replied my comments, and she said that those methodological innovation and empirical validation are good enough. Even sometimes they are crucial for advancing the theoretical understanding. Even new theories are not proposed in her thesis. So I would like to ask for your suggestion. How do you think about this? Thank you so much.
Well, good question. And if you ask different people, they will give you different answers. Actually, depending on the discipline, depending on the root discipline of the topic, for some discipline, having a methodological breakthrough, that's very, very important. If you look at mathematics, economics, or some of the other disciplines, then yes, if you can develop a new method, that's really something. Right, in the future, or statistics, in the future, people will cite your methodology because you develop something new. So not necessarily all research could have theoretical contribution. They can say that they make knowledge contribution. So sometimes in the review process, we will say theoretical / methodological contribution. So if even for journal articles, if the author can claim that this method is really new, it's really something new that nobody else is, not just applying or using a method developed in a different discipline to tourism, it's a brand new methodology, and of course that is contribution. So if you believe the student in that case develop something that nobody else had done before, I will buy the answer from the student. But I thought the student gave a very good answer. At least the student defended the thesis, right?
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. But I understand where your question comes from. That's very often my question as well, examining a PhD thesis. PhD stands for Doctor of Philosophy, and very often the theory is the philosophical aspect of the degree. If I can go back to the experimental design studies, or actually any study, we need to look at internal external validity. For experimental design studies, internal validity refers to the change causing by the treatment. So when you say this study has internal validity, then you're really saying any change or no change of one thing was actually caused by the treatment. And that is internal validity. External validity then relates to the generalizability of a study. Is the finding only confined to this particular experiment, or can the results be generalized more broadly? To accomplish internal external validity, well, internal validity, then the scenarios needs to be very carefully designed. That means you need to control the intervening variables, and you want to make sure the scenarios are real so that your participants can imagine if you really ask them to imagine. But rather, I would not use the term imagine, because you're just presenting things and you look at their reaction. Even though sometimes the reviewers say, you spend too much time on the technical aspect, but still it is important. If you do experimental design, then you need to report the process of developing the scenarios. If you've done 3 pilot tests, report all 3 pilot tests. However brief they are, then at least you need to mention that to ensure the reviewers and the readers of the internal validity of your experimental design of your scenario. And then the other thing relates to the qualification of the participants. Can participants really answer the question? Do the participant have relevant experience to understand the scenario and answer the question, make the judgment? It's more than simply say that, oh yeah, we have a realism check. We ask the respondent whether they can relate to the story. We need to provide more evidence than that. External validity relates to the replication and cross-validation of the study results. And of course, for experimental design studies, we also have measurement items. Then we need to make sure that the measurement items are appropriate and suitable and particular suit the needs of this particular experiment rather than just adopting a set of measurement previously tested, published. Yes, they're fine, but do they fit the particular situation of the study on hand? So all of these needs to be provided for the reviewer to judge the internal external validity of the experimental design. Because we're seeing so many experimental design studies nowadays going through the submission system, we really need to make sure that the studies are rigorous.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Great to see many familiar names today. I also want to ask some question about the experiment design. But as far as I reviewed, especially for tourism management, I think over 80% of our experiments in our field are like asking, like manipulating, asking people to read, to see something, or even to see some videos to try to manipulate the situation. But when I was working with colleagues in Bournemouth University, we were having a team with colleagues from psychology, nursing, social works. We actually were working on a project, but it's about people with dementia. And we want to see how the technology related to tourism could try to release or try to how that's impact on their symptoms. But when we are talking about this interdisciplinary collaboration, I realized we have a lot of differences in the study design. For example, it's extremely difficult for us to find the really people with dementia, and we managed to find around 15 to 20. We did both quantitative and qualitative experiment. But when we're trying to publish it, I'm a little bit hesitant because they feel the sample size, the design, they are comfortable for publication in their field. But I do not really see much examples in our tourism field. I'm not confident. For example, small sample size with those real experiments and some statistics and also in-depth interviews. I mean, facing those kind of differences in design, what's our view, for example, for tourism management? How do we treat those kind of differences across different disciplines? Yeah, that's my question.
Okay, yeah, very, very good question. And it's quite complicated because you have mixed study methods, right? You have qualitative and quantitative. So the qualitative aspect, then really the sample size is not an issue. As long as, for example, if you do interview, as long as you think you get all the information you can get, no new information will be obtained, then whatever sample size you have is sufficient. And then for the quantitative analysis, then you need to look at, can you identify statistical significance? Whether you use parametric, non-parametric tests. I think as long as you can justify, as long as you can demonstrate the rigor of your study. I don't think the review, well, maybe some of the reviewers may indicate that the sample size is too small, but depending on the background of the reviewer. And I understand the difficulty of getting participants with particular health issues. And also then you're running into the ethical clearance issue as well.
For a long time, yes.
Yeah. So yeah, it is difficult, but I think to encourage interdisciplinary research, sometimes we look at those with a bigger picture, rather than nitpicking, saying, oh, your sample size has to be X. As long as you're contributing your knowledge, you're pushing the knowledge boundary forward, I think you should give it a try. I mean, it doesn't hurt, right? You never know. You never know what's going to happen. Yeah.
Actually, we prepared a study for a special issue, but we realized we can never catch the deadline because the ethical checklist itself goes through several months. So, but I think maybe we can try in the future, maybe some normal track. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Yeah. Yes, I understand. I was just talking to somebody else, also doing research related to participants having special needs, and they said exactly what you're saying. They have a tough time. The first challenge is getting the participant, but then the second challenge is to convince the reviewers that they actually have received ethical approval and they actually have received consent from the participant. So yeah, it's difficult. It's more difficult, but that I think the research results will be more rewarding, right? They're very meaningful research topics. There is a special issue just announced for tourism management on methodological innovation. So if any of you are doing research related to methodology, then you're welcome to go to the website to take a look at the cover paper of this special issue. And that relates to my earlier comments about the different disciplinary backgrounds. With a background in, I think all three guest editors having a background in economics, they think that theoretical contribution may not be absolutely necessary for every piece of research. Sometimes methodological contributions are just as important, or sometimes even more important for that particular discipline. There is a question in the chat box regarding theoretical contributions. Does a literature review also need theoretical contribution? How can a literature review contribute theoretically? That is a good question. We see a lot of literature review papers being published. However, as you know or may not know, tourism management doesn't publish literature review papers for the reason that you mentioned, because literature review normally does not contribute to theory development. You're just reviewing what happened. You're just reviewing what have been done rather than creating new knowledge. So as part of the author's guide, we indicated that tourism management normally does not publish pure systematic literature review or bibliometric review, because usually systematic or bibliometric review is basically a review of what have been done rather than creating something new. We do have a progress in tourism, or progress in tourism research category. That is more, it goes beyond systematic literature review. That is more of a narrative review. You can do a Google search or whatever search engine you're using to look at what is a narrative review. Narrative reviews don't have to be a comprehensive review of all the papers that have been published. You see those bibliometric studies or systematic literature review studies, they will tell you what keywords they use and how many papers they came up with, goes through the screening process and this and that. So everything that has been published is included in the review data set. But a narrative review is more taking an expert view. So narrative reviews are usually written by experienced researchers. They understand the discipline, they understand the topic area, they have done research in the area over the years, so they know what happened, what has been done, what is known, what is missing, and what should we do in the future. So it's more of a narrative of the past, identifying the gaps, and then what do we need to do in the future. So yeah, I guess I answer your question in a different way. Pure literature review doesn't really contribute to theoretical advancement. We have another question in the chat box from an undergraduate student, indicating her or his research interest is mainly in tourism behavior based on questionnaire and using an analysis such as SEM and linear regression, but the student was told by the professor that more in-depth study needs to be done by using experimental methods. And the question is whether questionnaire method research is losing vitality. Not necessarily. I mean, everybody disagree. Everybody has his or her own opinion. I'm not saying that your teacher is not right, but I look at experimental design or questionnaire or qualitative study, interview, focus group. All of these are methods. Not one is better than the other. Questionnaire or survey-based research has its limitation. Has a lot of potential area for bias, sampling bias, measurement bias, all of those possible biases. Same for experimental design. Experimental design I just mentioned has been criticized. There are a lot of problems with experimental design if you don't do that thoroughly, design that very rigorously. So any method has potential, any methods has potential biases as well. So I wouldn't say you definitely have to do use one method over the other. Depending on the question you want to answer, sometimes questionnaire is the best way to go collect data, but in another scenario, then experimental methods could be the way to go. Experimental methods are relatively new for tourism. I remember my co-author and I published an experimental method design study. Probably we started doing that maybe 10 years ago. At that time, not many people use experimental design. So we had a tough time submitting the manuscript, going through the review process. But nowadays, like I mentioned, in the past few years, about a third of the studies published in the 6 journals that we looked at, a third of them use experimental design methods. So certainly it is very popular now, but it doesn't mean that I think that the methods, hot methods come and go. But for me, it's just one of the methods. So depending on what are you good at? Are you good at qualitative data collection analysis or quantitative? So one is your ability, one is your interest, and then one is what is the research question. Then you go identify the most suitable method. The other thing that when Daisy asked the question that I thought about was very often when we look at manuscripts from the tourism hospitality area, the experimental designs are basically scenario based. You ask people to read something, to watch a video, but very few actually have done on-site or field experiment. So online, very often they collect data online, ask people to read a half a page scenario. Again, those are the realism of those manipulation could be questioned. Reading something on paper is very different from going to a theme park, for example, and observe people and doing a field experiment. In other discipline, Daisy mentioned psychology, they could do clinical experiment. It's kind of like our field experiment. So it would be good to have a combination of, rather than having study 1, 2, 3 all done online using scenarios. The validity issue could be questioned. So if at least one of the 2, one of the 3 studies could be done in the field, then that could be more convincing in terms of the internal validity of the study design. So I see a lot of good papers published lately, questioning the methodology, questioning the theoretical, the use of the term theory and theoretical underpinning, and then questioning about our selection of variables, constructs, theoretical framework. So there've been quite a few good papers, not studies, but good papers published lately, and those are very good to review and reflect on the research that we do. Yeah, the good comment in the chat box again, there was a paper published on the importance of precise language use. Exactly, that's the talking about the difference between, for example, if you are really measuring intention, then you should say so rather than saying behavior. So when we use terminology, we need to be very precise. Sometimes I see a paper use the term theory very loosely. For example, decision-making theories, but then without mentioning which particular theory. So throughout the paper, basically talking about decision-making theories, attitude theories, and this and that, and therefore making theoretical contribution, but still, after reading the entire manuscript, I have no idea what is exactly the theoretical underpinning or what theory this particular piece contribute to. So yeah, using precise terminology is very, very important. And because of the ease of data collection nowadays, you can collect data very quickly online. We see the phenomenon of treating research as a production line, and that's very, very unfortunate. Simply because you can do it quickly doesn't mean that you should always do it quickly. Especially with experimental design studies, we see authors would change one variable at a time and then try to come up with use the same formula, designing the similar type of scenario template, just changing the context, changing one variable, 2 variable at a time, and then go through the data collection online very quickly, and then boom, you get another manuscript ready for submission. Those are cookie cutter kind of machine processed papers. I think the editor and the reviewers can see it through. Really, it's not a very innovative piece. When you look at each individual pieces, they're not really innovative, because sometimes you review a paper, you're like, oh, it looks like I've seen this before. The template, is basically the same, study 1, 2, 3, and even sometimes the model look very similar, just different names. That is not a way to do research. I understand the pressure of publication. Number of publication is definitely important, but if you simply use an assembly line or doing a robotic motion of producing manuscript, then there's really no fun in doing it. You're not discovering anything that you're curious about. Not only that, from the reviewer's perspective, it's very easily to identify. Simply because you can produce a paper quickly doesn't mean that all of them will get published. You might as well spend the time and energy and money and other resources into something that you're really interested and you think that really has great value. We discussed the importance of external validity quite a few times, and as you know, tourism management prefers to publish studies based on multiple sources of data, multi-study, but it seems like the message is still not getting through to all the authors. With experimental design, again, it seems like the topic of today, very often we see study 1, study 2, study 3, or experimental 1, 2, 3. But it's just the other day, maybe yesterday, I got a paper having 3 studies, but each study only tests 1 hypothesis. Then that really defeats the purpose of having multiple study, because having multiple study, the purpose is for you to test and retest and retest. But if you're doing study 1, testing hypothesis 1, study 2, testing hypothesis 2, study 3, testing hypothesis 3, then each hypothesis is only tested once. So again, you're still not providing evidence of external validity of the results. So retesting and validating is the original intent of having multiple studies, because if we would really like to make theoretical contributions, as you know, theories are basically the relationships that were tested and tested and tested, and we know it works. It doesn't matter which context, right? Theories are supposed to be universal. So before it can be universal, then the relationships have been tested, and tested. So if you really want to be confident by saying this study makes theoretical contribution, then it cannot be simply results based on one-off, whether it's experiment or survey or a single data source. Because if you only have one single data source, you cannot defend the results, because you never know. There could be noise in your data set, there could be bias in your sample, there could be a lot of issues. So that's why we would prefer to publish studies with multiple data set to establish the external validity of the findings as part of the efforts to make theoretical contribution. Sometimes I get email from early career researchers indicating their willingness to review for the journal, and that is certainly great. For us to find you in the system, please make sure you include as many classification and personal keywords as possible in your profile, because very often when we try to find reviewers, now with the submission system, the submission system will list a number of suggested reviewers based on matching. So the more keywords and classifications you provide in the system, the better the chance that we will find you. And please do a good job of reviewing, providing sufficient comments. I'm sure you appreciate receiving reviewer comments, so that the comments can help you improve the papers. And I understand some journals even say you have to provide 1 page or 1.5 page of comments. Tourism management doesn't specify that, but if you have more detailed review comments, then that will be very, very helpful. We do try to keep a record of the quality of reviewers in the system. For some of the reviewers, if the comments that they provided are not very helpful, then they're most likely will not be invited back to do another round of review. So and we had some webinars on earlier on how to be a good reviewer, and also the benefits of being reviewers. Being a reviewer, you get to see the most updated research being done by others, by your peers in a similar interest area, and very often you can get quite inspired by what other people are doing. So please, helping with the review process is not a waste of time. Actually, I enjoy reviewing papers for others, and because very often I learn something new. And please do a good job if you're asked to be a reviewer. Do a good job, because we do keep a record of who are our good reviewers, and we do a review of that every year or so, once or twice a year. So. Right, the comment in the box is, can you talk about the current research trends in smart tourism? That is really a very broad topic. Smart tourism can relate to anything and everything, really. Could relate to infrastructure, could relate to consumer behavior, could relate to the use of AI, robotics. So if you have any specific question related to smart tourism, I'm happy to answer. But most likely, in a big portion of the research that we do in the future probably relates to smart tourism, because that's just the way it is in terms of tourist behavior, and also all the commercial sectors. They are adopting new technology, then that could qualify as smart tourism as well. So it's difficult to classify what is smart tourism. Pretty much everything we do now relates to smart tourism. When you prepare a manuscript, make sure you include the basics. You could include your questionnaire as an attachment, or you can have a table or appendix list all the measurement items. It sounds very fundamental, but very often we find authors forget about that. Maybe they get too excited about reporting the results, or they just say this set of measurement was adapted from another study and just give you the reference. But really, you need to include all the measurement items in the manuscript submission, so that the reviewer can look at the measurement items and make a judgment, if for nothing else, the face validity of the measurement items. In the past, we require the basic descriptive statistics, like the means and standard deviations, but I understand the word limitation nowadays, but at least you need to include all the measurement items, so that the reviewers can judge the face validity or the quality of your questionnaire design. The question in the chat box is, what should be the balance between the limited word range of a paper and the need for a perfectly duplicated test? I'm not sure, what do you mean by a duplicated test? If you're talking about pilot tests or test and retest, I assume you will use the same scenario, or you will use the same measurement items. Then you can simply report the results of different data sets that you collected. And I guess you need to learn how to present things concisely. Word limits doesn't mean you cut off things. It means you package things in a more condensed manner. For example, in a table, in a table, you can have multiple columns, right? So you don't have to have a separate table for test 1 and another table for test 2. You can have one table basically using the same measurement items, reporting the results of test 1 and test 2 in the same table. And that doesn't take a lot more words, right? If you have one table and you simply just add a column reporting the results of the retest, then you're simply adding a few dozen words. That's it. So yeah, so if you do a questionnaire or interviews, then designing, I guess table will be the most efficient way to present information in that case, especially if there are a lot of similarities between, test 1 and test 2. And the results could be summarized. So whatever you present in the table or figure, you don't have to repeat. And that's another thing that we often see. Authors, quote unquote, waste a lot of words in the text because you're repeating. For example, factor 1 is named this, factor 2 is named this, and factor 1 has 3 items, factor 2 has 5 items. You don't have to say that because you already presented that in the table. So you just refer the readers to the table. Then those words, you can use the word count for something else. And that's another thing I see presents a challenge for students is to turn your thesis into a manuscript. Your thesis, a doctoral thesis, could be 60, 70, 80,000 words, and then you need to reduce that to 10,000 words. So it's absolutely not cut and paste. It's not removing 70,000 words. It's basically recrafting. You have to learn a different way of writing, presenting more concisely, telling the same story. You don't cut off the story. You tell the same story, but then you present that with fewer words. It is difficult. It is a challenge, but you can learn it. All right. If no question, you're welcome to join me next month. If you're starting a new semester, have a great semester, have a great start, whether you're taking classes or teaching classes, enjoy the teaching and learning. And meanwhile, don't forget, continue to do your research. I will see you next month then.